Hi and welcome into the lesson The Greatest Chess Game Everyone Must Know. Millions of games have been played during the history of chess, but there is only very little percentage of games that were the most influential, the most important and instructive. And every aspiring chess player just must know these few games. Today we'll talk about one of them, the game played by Paul Morphy, one of the greatest players of the United States. I think together with Bobby Fischer, these two are by far the greatest players of the US and maybe for the entire world as well. Just to give you an idea about his power, Morphy played handicap games, giving the extra pawn and extra move to any of his opponents. I really doubt that Magnus Carlsen will be able to do the same trick today. I'm Igor Smirnov, international grandmaster and a chess coach from the Remote Chess Academy, and my main point today is not just to show you the game played by Paul Morphy, but to show you the main ideas he used in his games, so that you can do the same in your own practice and get the same brilliant results. We're going to see the game between Paul Morphy and two dukes played in Paris in the Opera House. And let's just go ahead and get started. Now the game started with e4, e5, knight f3, d6, and here white played d4. And that's the first moment when I'd like to start by highlighting the fact that Morphy was playing in a very straightforward yet very effective style. Now we know that the purpose of the game is to checkmate the opponent's king. And that's what he really tried to do. He always tried to target and attack the opponent's king. Of course, there were some games that ended in an endgame, but I would say that he normally tried to finalize the game by the direct attack of the opponent's king. And if you can attack the opponent's king, it's great and you should do that. If you can't attack the king right now, then at least attack something. At least attack opponent's pawns or pieces, attack whatever you can. And here, by playing d4, white starts to attack the black's pawn. So now black already has to react somehow. And that's the first main rule that you need to remember about this style of playing. Always attack, especially the opponent's king. So let's go ahead. Black played bishop g4, now d takes e5. Now if black doesn't want to lose the pawn, he has to take white's knight. You see that while playing attacking moves, white always forces the opponent's reaction. Black can't do what he wants, he only has to react. Now, what would you do here as white? Still attack, so white played bishop c4, and now the goal is to take queen takes f7, winning the game in one move. Black replied with knight to f6. How would you play here? Remember, your goal is to attack, and primarily attack the opponent's king. So white played queen b3. This time this is a double attack, both to the f7 square and on the b7 pawn. And already black suffers because he can't protect both of his weaknesses. Black replied queen to e7, protecting his king. And let me ask you the same question once again. How would you play here as white? I'm pretty sure that most of the players would like to grab that pawn on the b7. You just take the pawn, you attack the rook, and everything looks awesome. After that, however, black will play queen to b4 check, will trade off the queens, and although, of course, white has the serious advantage in endgame due to his extra pawn, still the game goes on. And as we already know, Morphy tried to attack the opponent's king. He was not that much enthusiastic about playing long endgames. I really want to dwell upon this topic because this principle that I'm going to tell you right now was one of the critical points of the whole Morphy strategy. Let's use an analogy. Imagine you're a commander of the army and you want to start a war to defeat your enemy. When will you start your attack? Obviously, it's better to do that when your opponent is unprepared, when his forces are dozing. And that's why lots of wars were started before the sunrise, somewhere around 4 a.m. Well, I hope that you will not initiate the real war. You'd better apply these principles for chess games. Anyway, the bottom line is still the same. You want to attack when your opponent's forces are unprepared, when they are dozing. And that's what Morphy always tried to do in his games. If he's seen that his opponent's forces are dozing on the initial squares, he always tried to rush for the attack and begin that assault as quickly as possible. And that's why he played knight c3. And the lesson you can learn here is that you need to value quick development more than material. You value quick development and activity of your pieces more than material because you want to deploy your forces quickly and start the attack when your opponent is still unprepared. Okay, let's move on. Black played c6, protecting his b7 pawn. Now bishop g5, white continues to develop his pieces. Black answered b5. Now that's another critical moment of the game. How would you play here? Well, when your opponent just played b5, attacking your bishop, then the very natural reaction is just to go back, to play bishop d3, for example. But we already know that you want to play quickly. You want to attack when your opponent's forces are dozing on the last rank, so you don't want to lose time making backward moves. So that's one thing. And there is another thing. Let me ask you this question. How can white attack black's king in this position? It's not so easy to find any direct way. Well, you can say some moves that you can prepare, you can do this and you can do that, and somewhere in the future you may hope to attack the king. But if you want to attack it right now, how can you do that? That's a tough question. And here comes another principle of Morphy's strategy. He was always willing to sacrifice the material to open up a position and start a direct attack. That's why in this position, instead of retreating, he took knight takes b5. This sacrifice helps him to continue developing his pieces in a quick manner, and at the same time, right now white can start attacking the black's king directly. Now the bishop is attacking the king, and if required, the queen can join, so you can see that when you open up the position, it enables your direct attack towards the opponent's king. Black covered his king with knight to d7, white castled, attacking that d7 knight once again. So black has to protect it, rook to d8. Okay, now let me ask you another question. We know that one of the key elements of Morphy's strategy was to deploy all of your forces into the battlefield as quickly as possible. At the moment, most of the white's pieces are very active, except for the rook on h1, which is still doing nothing. How can you bring this piece into play? Well, ideally speaking, you would like to have it on the d-file where it can support white's pressure along the d-file. And the one way to do that is you can, for example, move your d1 rook to d2 and then bring another rook to d1, double rooks along the d-file. And that's a good plan generally speaking, but the drawback is that you have to waste one move on the preparation, on playing your rook d1 to d2. So now let's reformulate the question. You know that you want to deploy the forces as quickly as possible, using the situation that your opponent is still unprepared, that his forces are dozing. So the real question is, how can you bring the h1 rook into the battle without wasting time? And the answer is rook takes d7. White is vacating the d1 square without wasting any time, because now after the exchange, white simply brings the rook and it attacks the opponent's rook on the d7. And here I'd like to tell you another concept which is quite unknown and many players misunderstand it, even though Morphy understood it 150 years back. Okay, let me ask you one question. How do you evaluate a chess position? Well, you look at the board and you see how many pieces white have, how many pieces black has, and then you compare and decide who is better, right? Something like that. Of course, you may evaluate other factors like activity, king safety, and so forth, but anyway, you look at the board and you see who is better. There is another idea, though. We know that the goal of the chess game is to checkmate the opponent's king. And therefore, the area around the opponent's king has the greatest value. You don't have to dominate on the whole board. You need to dominate only in the narrow territory around the opponent's king. So let's narrow our focus to the area around the black's king and evaluate the white pieces that influence this territory and the black's pieces that influence this territory as well. If we talk about the black species, he has, well, the knight on f6 protecting the rook itself covering the king, and the queen protecting the rook. So black has those three pieces in defense. Yes, black also has the rook in the corner and the bishop, but they are in the initial squares and doing nothing, so we can disregard them for a moment. If we think about the white pieces that are attacking, then these are the two bishops, both of them exert strong pressure, the rook on the d1, definitely very active, and the queen on the b3, although not doing much right at the moment, but still it's quite active. It can go to b8, for example, after a bishop takes the rook, or it can go to a4 and increase the pressure, and therefore the queen also takes part into the white's assault. We may conclude that white has 4 attackers against the 3 defenders, and those 3 defenders are actually quite miserable because the rook is pinned and the knight is pinned, so those defenders are very much restricted and can't do anything. And that's why when you focus your attention on the battlefield, on the area around the opponent's king, you can very easily understand what you need to do. You need to get domination in this area, and if you got it, you'll win the game easily. Black played queen to e6, trying to somehow unpin his pieces. White took the rook, and now let me ask you to find the final blow. In fact, white can win the game in 2 moves. So can you find the checkmating continuation? It's queen to b8. Well, if you want to find a checkmate, you need to look for checks, right? So queen b8 and rook d8. Brilliant finish of the brilliant game. Now let's sum up the main key takeaways that you need to remember from the Paul Morphy strategy so that you can apply them in your own games. The first rule that Morphy used in his games was to attack. The purpose of the chess game, the ultimate goal, is to checkmate your opponent, and that's why you want to attack, especially attack the opponent's king. That's pretty simple and very effective. Secondly, bring your forces into the battlefield quickly. You need to attack while your opponent's forces are unprepared, when they are dozing on their initial positions, or if they stuck somewhere on another side of the board, and you need to quickly get domination in the area around the opponent's king and start the attack there. The third rule is sacrifice material for activity and opening of the position. Sacrificing material for activity should now be something natural for you. You know that you need to value quick development and advantage in activity more than material. You don't need to have so much material, you just need to have domination in the narrow territory around the opponent's king. And if we talk about sacrificing material for opening of the position, that is pretty logical as well. It connects to the first item. If you want to attack the opponent's king, first of all you need to break up his defense. You need to open up the position. Only then your forces will be able to target the opponent's king directly. So these 3 rules are the essence of everything that Morphy did in his games, and by just following these 3 simple ideas, he managed to devastate all of his opponents with a huge score. And if you follow these rules into your games, you will definitely achieve some good results. Otherwise, if you don't follow Morphy's rules, you'll fall into Murphy's rule. Sorry, just kidding. And to end up the lesson, let's test your skills with another brilliant position from the game of Paul Morphy. Here's another game of Paul Morphy. He's playing white. Now your task is to find the right move for white. Of course, it's not that you just guess the move. Apply the rules that we discussed previously and find the right move. Then, write your answer in the comments area below. Once you found your solution, then below the video you can find the link for a solution. Click there and check yourself. Thank you for watching. I really hope it will help you win a lot of brilliant games, and see you in the next lessons. Bye bye.